Welcome into This Week in Big Sky Football. I'm your host, Bryson Lester. We've got a big week of FCS football coming up, and we've got Sam Herder here with us from Hero Sports. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to stop by. Got a lot to talk about today. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, of course. And, we'll just go ahead and dive right in. We'll start with Weber State. Crowned the Big Sky champions this week for the fourth season in a row. Just kind of a crazy run here by Jay Hill and the Wildcats. And, is it too soon to start calling what Weber State's doing here a dynasty?
Well, in Big Sky terms, I think you can, possibly start labeling that with Weber State just with their consecutive Big Sky titles. They did win it outright this year. I know just with the scheduling, it's usually shared in the Big Sky Conference. But what Weber State has done under Jay Hill has been phenomenal when he took over in the mid 2010s. I mean, Weber State's, from a national perspective, just was nowhere on the radar. And now not only are they winning Big Sky titles, they made it to the quarterfinals, and now the semifinals. Definitely has a good shot to make it deep in the playoffs again this spring.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about Weber State. You said they claimed the outright title. They got the automatic berth into the FCS playoff. They've had the track record. They've been good in the playoff in years past. What do you expect out of this Wildcat squad as they head into the FCS playoff this year for, another season?
Yeah, I think they have, with only 4 seeds to go around this spring. I don't know for sure if the Wildcats will get a seed. In my opinion, I think they should. Even though they've edged some opponents that don't have great overall records, that's just kind of their style of play of grinding it out. And they are 5-0, so I do think they'll probably get probably the 4 seed. Behind some teams like maybe a North Dakota State or a South Dakota State, just because those teams have more ranked wins. But I do think Weber State is positioned well to make some noise in the playoffs. Strong running game, really good defense. We know just with past history, you need a good defense to win in the playoffs. And so, I think they're good enough to definitely make it to the semifinals. And then, depending on matchups, potentially could be playing in Frisco.
That defense definitely shined through against Idaho State down the stretch there, because Vanderwall was dealing a little bit, and they stepped up down the stretch of that game to make sure Idaho State couldn't get back on the board.
Yeah, definitely. And, just like I said, they kind of have that grinded out style of play. And, we've had question marks about Weber State's offense for a number of years now, just because, they're not going to blow you away with, scoring 50 points or anything like that. And so it's obviously important to have a great defense to hold opponents down to, under 14 points usually.
We'll transition here. We'll talk about Eastern Washington a little bit. Obviously, talking about the defense of Weber State, offense of Eastern Washington, what's carried them a lot this season. They secured a 5-1 record. They only had that one loss in the season opener. Let's talk about the Eagles a little bit. How you feel about the Eagles, as we march toward the FCS selection show on Sunday?
Yeah, with Weber State, securing the auto bid, I think it's all but a guarantee that Eastern Washington will get one of the 6 at-large bids. Finishing 5-4-1 or 5-1. That's certainly good enough, especially out of a good conference like the Big Sky, to get an at-large bid. And they're playing well. I mean, you can. If you watch all the games, you can almost make the case that maybe Eastern Washington is looking more impressive than Weber State right now. And it's kind of like 2019. They're peaking at the right time toward the end of the season to overcome maybe an early loss, or in 2019's case, some early losses. Back in 2019, I think Eastern Washington was easily one of the best 24 teams in the country. They just didn't make it in the playoffs because I think they had 4 losses total in 2019. Well, now in this spring, they're playing their best football again at the end of the season. Again, going to be in the playoffs, and so I think Eastern Washington is another team that can win in the first round, and then just depending on who they get sent to in the quarterfinals, if it's a good matchup, we can certainly see Eastern Washington in the semifinals as well.
Absolutely, Eastern Washington peaking at the right time, down the stretch here. Let's talk about UC Davis a little bit. Obviously, they finished their season 3-2. They didn't play last weekend. They don't get to play this upcoming weekend. Kind of what's the perspective on the Aggies right now?
Yeah, UC Davis will probably tune in to the selection show just in case. I highly doubt that the Aggies will get in to the playoffs because with only 6 at-large bids to go around, I'm just not sure a 3-2 team from the Big Sky will make it in the field. But you never know. They did have that close loss to Weber State, which kind of tells us that even if they are only 3-2, certainly UC Davis is a good team for this spring. But I think they're looking good for the fall. I think this was a good building block for the fall season for UC Davis. Obviously after making the quarterfinals in 2018, came into 2019 highly ranked, in the top 5, and things just didn't work out in 2019. But I think, just with Hunter Rodriguez, with his emergence at the quarterback position, I think UC Davis is set up well to make some noise in the fall.
Want to hit on Southern Utah real quick, Sam. They finished the year 1-5, but every single one of their losses was by a possession or less. 3 of the games were 1 or 2 point games. So they're honestly 3 plays away from being 4-2 this year. This is a team that won the Big Sky in 2015 and 2017. What do you think it'll take for Southern Utah to get on the right track come this fall?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, for Southern Utah because they were that interesting team that won the title, then they had a down year, then won the title again, and now they've had some consecutive down years. It's just you look at where the Big Sky was at in the mid 2010s to now. I mean, Weber State has emerged. Montana State are better now than they were in the mid 2010s. I mean, UC Davis has emerged. UC Davis obviously has always been at the top, and there's just been those handful of teams that have slid past Southern Utah. And so I think for them, I mean, they're in a good area of the country. They can, I know Weber State does it obviously, but they can try and get those fringe FBS guys where instead of you talk to a guy that has a walk-on opportunity at a Mountain West school, maybe you offer him a full ride to come to your school. So I do think there are opportunities there for Southern Utah to get some big-time recruits. I also think it's just going to come, down to the athletic department if they want to invest into the football program or not, because you see, I mean, Weber State has that new facility going up. Montana's new facility went up. Montana State is building a new facility. I know UC Davis, I don't know if the construction has started yet, but they have a new facility going up. And so we know there's kind of that arms race in facilities in college football. And if you're not keeping up, new recruits like shiny new things. And so I think sometimes that's half the battle of recruiting is just being able to show off some of those nice shiny things.
Absolutely. You mentioned Montana. They started their season last week. They're going to face off against Portland State this week. Obviously not playing a Big Sky schedule, but getting a couple contests in here. How important do you think it'll be for Montana and Portland State that, they didn't necessarily play a Big Sky schedule this spring, but they're still going to get some contests in heading into the fall?
I think it's really important. There's kind of that fine line of playing too many games for like a Weber State. They could potentially play 9 games this spring. You wonder how that impacts them going into the fall. But you kind of weigh that up against, Montana State or Sacramento State, where their players will go 20, 21 months without playing one single game. And that also kind of makes you worry about, just execution to start the fall season. So I think Montana, having those 2 games or having these 2 games, Portland State having 1 game in, I think it's important, just to see what you have. Obviously, Montana is breaking in a new starting quarterback. You can kind of figure out some depth things. You keep the players engaged, on and off the field just because they have, games to prep for, stuff to look forward to instead of – because, I mean, college football players, they want to play games, and to go 20 months without playing games is obviously tough. So I think it's really important for these 2 programs to get 1 or 2 games in this spring.
Absolutely. There's a lot of big games this weekend. We'll hit on some of those as we continue on here just in a little bit. But one game in the Big Sky this weekend, Northern Arizona hosting Idaho. This should be a fun game. Both teams, have had some really good performances this year. What do we expect to see out of this NAU Idaho matchup?
Yeah, I think because both teams are out of the playoff picture now. So I think both teams, it'll be interesting to see both teams, what they do. Or are they still going to have their starters out? Are they going to start playing some younger players? I know with Northern Arizona, they've had some roster turnover since Coach Ball took over, just kind of implementing his culture and his playing style. And so, I think it's good because you've seen some teams across the FCS, once it was clear they weren't going to be in the playoff picture anymore, just to opt out and look forward to the fall season. But I think it's good for programs like Northern Arizona that are they're trying to find out who they have, the depth and who can step up and make plays. And so while nationally there's not really much on the line for these two teams in this game, I think it's still a valuable game for both teams just to see what they have and, see what players can make an impact for them in the fall.
Awesome. Good stuff, Sam. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with you. But right now, we're going to throw it over to Mary Louise Cook as she brings you your Root Sports Big Sky Players of the Week.
Thanks, Bryson. On a weekend where Big Sky Conference football teams were facing off against a rival for a second time this season, 3 performers stood out as the league's Root Sports Football Players of the Week. After falling behind 14-0, Northern Arizona redshirt senior quarterback Keandre Woodtee led his team to a victory over rival Southern Utah and earned the offensive honor for the first time in his career in the process. Woodtee was responsible for 3 of NAU's 4 touchdowns, with 2 on the ground and 1 through the air. He completed 23 passes for a career-high 289 yards and 1 touchdown, while rushing for 38 yards and 2 scores. Now, helping guide his team to a 4th consecutive Big Sky Conference title and the first outright one in program history, Weber State's Connor Mortensen earned the Defensive Player of the Week honor. The senior finished with 11 tackles at the linebacker position, 9 of which were solo. He also racked up 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 of which were unassisted. Now, keeping the Idaho State Bengals out of a solid position to get their offense going, Weber State punter Mackenzie Morgan earned the Big Sky Special Teams Player of the Week honor. The junior had 5 punts on the day and sent 3 over 50 yards to finish with an average of 51.6 yards per punt. 4 of those 5 punts were downed inside of the 20-yard line. His average of 51.6 is the 2nd best in the Big Sky this season and was the 4th best single game average in Weber State history. He also had his longest punt of the season measure in at 65 yards. Back to you, Bryson.
Thanks, Mary Louise, for bringing us those Root Sports Players of the Week. Some good performances last week here in the Big Sky Conference. Continuing on with Sam Herder from Hero Sports. Sam, let's take just a quick look at the top 25 polls. With the most recent updates, what really stood out to you this week?
Yeah, I mean, the polls are really hard this year, especially when, there was that 3-week period of some of the top teams not playing a game. James Madison, North Dakota State, UND, South Dakota States. Combined between those 4 teams, I think they played like 2 combined games in the last month. So it's just kind of hard to move things around. I do think it's interesting that, North Dakota State is getting more and more first place votes. James Madison still has a pretty healthy lead as far as the number 1 overall spot. But, after NDSU loses an early season game, they usually kind of just climb back up the top 25 polls. And so, not overall, not much to take away from this week's poll. Again, it's hard just because I know some of these teams for this poll, like UC Davis isn't playing anymore. There's several teams you don't know exactly where to rank them just because they're not playing in any more games entering this last week of the season.
Right. A lot of big games on the docket this weekend. We'll knock on wood, make sure none of them get canceled. But when you kind of look around the FCS landscape going into this weekend, what matchups draw your eye the most here?
Yeah, and we've had 2 conferences decide to do conference championship games to decide their AQ in the playoffs. Last week was a great game in the NEC, and then this weekend the Patriot League is deciding their champion between Holy Cross and Bucknell. So that'll be a fun one. The big matchup nationally is North Dakota State hosting South Dakota State, 2 top 4 teams. I think the winner has a pretty good chance to for sure be a top 2 seed, if not the number 1 seed. They could potentially jump James Madison just because JMU won't. I think if JMU beats Richmond, they would only have 1 ranked win compared to NDSU or South Dakota State having 3 or 4 ranked wins, and so that's a huge matchup. I mentioned JMU. They play Richmond. That's a huge game in the CAA, and then also in the CAA North, you have Villanova playing Delaware. Those are the only 2 games in the CAA, I believe, but all 4 of those teams are in the playoff picture. There are some wild scenarios about, if this team wins, it can knock this team out, or if this team wins, it can knock the other team out. And so the CAA, there's a lot on the line in that conference this weekend.
So what you're saying is you'll have multiple screens going on Saturday.
Yep, I'll definitely be cross-eyed, just trying to pay attention to everything that's going on.
Everything leading up to Sunday, obviously the FCS selection show will be at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time. That'll be 8:30 Pacific here in the Big Sky on ESPNU. You know, you can speculate all you want, but until the bracket comes out, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. What kind of surprises, if any, do you foresee coming out of the FCS selection show here on Sunday?
Yeah, in a normal 24-team bracket, it's usually good for 2 or 3 surprises. I think there'll only be one surprise this year, and that's just who is going to get that 6 at-large bid. You know, I feel pretty comfortable saying the Valley will get 2 at-large bids. The CAA will get 2 at-large bids. Eastern Washington will get the 5th at-large bid. It's just who's that 6th one? Is it going to be, you know, could the Valley get another one? Could it be Missouri State, who's like 5-4 overall, but 3 of those losses are in the fall? So does that really count? Could it be a 2-loss Mercer team? Maybe Southeastern Louisiana, if they get a big win against Southern Illinois, you know, could they get in? Is Murray State's at 5-2 out of the OVC, or are they in the discussion? You know, Kennesaw State's, they got hammered by Monmouth, but they're still 3-1 or 4-1 overall. You know, maybe the committee pulls a surprise because we all think Kennesaw State is out just by how they lost to Monmouth, but you know, maybe they're still in the discussion. And so I think it's just whoever that number 6 team. I think there's probably, you ask 10 different people, there's probably 5 different answers on who the number 6 team will be as far as the at-large bid. So it'll be interesting to see what the committee goes with there.
Awesome. Good stuff. Sam Herder from Hero Sports. What are you working on this week? Anything fun coming out that you got publishing that fans can keep an eye out for?
Yeah, on herosports.com, published a feature story on Cade Johnson. Always great to talk about NFL draft prospects from the FCS. So that's out. And then just, you know, I think I'm going to go either today or tomorrow, publish just an overall look at the playoff bubble and who's in, who's out, you know, what are the different scenarios. I did something like that last week. And we got some answers last week on the playoff picture, but there's still a lot to be determined. So I'll probably publish something like that again, just kind of looking at each conference and what can happen for the playoff picture.
Awesome. Good stuff. Sam Herder, Hero Sports, thank you so much for taking your time. We appreciate it as always.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Awesome. And now let's send it back to Mary Luz as she breaks down the current Big Sky standings.
The final weekend of the regular season is here. The Big Sky has 2 games on the slate before the FCS playoffs kick off next week. Portland State will be making its spring debut with a game at Montana on Saturday. The Grizz had just opened up spring play last week with a 59-3 win against Central Washington. You can catch the game between Portland State and the Grizz at gogrizz.com/watch. Now, after picking up a win over Southern Utah on the road, Northern Arizona will see the Idaho Vandals at home. It will be the first time the Lumberjacks have played at home since their first game of the season. You can catch that game on Pluto TV or watchbigsky.com. Now, to finish the regular season with a 5-1 record, Eastern Washington defeated the Idaho Vandals at home 38-31. For the 4th consecutive season, the Wildcats of Weber State have claimed the Big Sky Conference Football Championship with a 2015 victory over Idaho State at home, finishing the spring 2021 season with a perfect 5-0 league record. The victory also secures Weber State the Big Sky's automatic bid to the FCS playoffs. They're the first team since 2016 to finish the regular season with a perfect record. Now, the FCS committee revealed its top 10 on ESPNU on April 1st. Weber State was tied for 5th in the rankings, and UC Davis was slotted 9th. The final bracket will be revealed during the selection show on Sunday, April 18th at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time on ESPNU. Until tomorrow, let's keep the conversation going on social media. Be sure to give @BigSkyConf a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you're looking for around-the-clock information on Big Sky football, be sure to follow @BigSkyFB on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us for this week in Big Sky Football.